talk about what's going on at the local level.
Thanks, Heather. And just a couple pieces too to sort of extend some of the things that Heather laid out. You know, we live in a country at the moment that is, for all intents and purposes, no longer governed by the rule of law. Right?
Can you speak closer to the mic, please?
Certainly. Is this any better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm a hip-hop MC. I like to hold my microphone. So, right, I mean, at the moment, the right to trial and due process have effectively been statutorily suspended. And we enjoy them because of the pleasure of the president. Right? This president has said that he will not use the authorities that Congress has invested in him, which will lie around, to use Justice Jackson's metaphor, like a loaded weapon, waiting for some president to abuse them in the future. It is an inevitability. Every place in the world that has ever flirted with powers like these inevitably descends into authoritarianism. In fact, we once used military detention as a definition of authoritarianism. Right? I mean, it is preposterous, quite frankly, that we're even having this debate. Yeah, we do for other countries, right? Yeah, it is astounding to me that in the United States we have to have this discussion, particularly in the year that we finally killed Osama bin Laden, in the same year that the Arab Spring happens. We adopted in the United States one of the same powers that the activists in Egypt were activating around. That was half the reason they were active, is because Mubarak had a detention authority that was arbitrary. And we've long decried these kinds of abuses at Guantanamo Bay, and what the NDAA represents is Guantanamo Bay coming home to roost. And the question, I think, before you as a community is, are you okay with that? And I would hope that you're not. You know, I would hope that, especially when, you know, when we talk about the local action around this bill, it started even before it was passed. The first jurisdiction to enact a resolution decrying the NDAA and reaffirming the right to trial with El Paso County, Colorado. It's the home of 5 military installations, including the Air Force Academy. And before the thing even became law, they were screaming bloody murder. And you read their resolution, and it's wrapped in the flag. These are American service members, retired officers, and vets saying we did not fight and die in foreign wars so that you could do this at home. And when the military is telling you that military detention has gone too far, you in Takoma Park should listen. And I'm really excited that you're here to take action about it. Just a few other pieces to lay down here. You know, one of the pieces about the NDAA's passage that I found so abhorrent was just that there was never a single hearing on the bill. And the votes against it were exactly, it was a cleanly bipartisan vote. There were 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans and 1 independent who said no. So why do you think that is? Do you think those kinds of votes just happen? That's negotiated, and it's negotiated so that you don't have anyone to hold accountable. No one wanted their fingerprints on this bill. How does that fly in a democratic society? Right? And so the question is, and let's think about our federal system. You're familiar with the separation of powers, right? We have 3 branches, a federal, an executive, a judicial, and a legislative. We also have a system of federalism, which is to say we have a federal, state, and local division among power. There are at least 8 branches of government. You don't have a local court, right? So you sort of have a missing piece there. So you have 3 branches at the federal level, 3 at the state, and you have at least 2 at the local. What are the ones over which you have the closest control as a community? Any guesses? Local executive or legislative? Legislative, right? I mean, the legislature represents you in a way the executive is not supposed to, and the local one is the closest. You have a member of your local legislature among you this evening, right? You have an opportunity as a community to raise your voice beyond the very narrow channels that the federal system affords you. And I would invite your attention to what local and state communities with which you might not agree have done in other parts of the country, right? It was about a year ago, all eyes were on Arizona. Why? Because it took matters into its own hands with respect to a policy that I certainly have found vitriolic and counterproductive and hateful for lots of reasons. Demonstrably so, and we see it touch off a firestorm around the country. A dozen resolutions around the country have already enacted resolutions opposing the NDAA. Takoma Park would be nowhere, and you'd be near the front. I don't want to say you're nowhere near the front, but you wouldn't be the first, right? You have plenty of cover. Albany County, New York State, passed a resolution against the NDAA. Macomb, New York. You go on the other side of the country, at Fairfax, California. There were 2 different counties in Colorado. And I do think that this convergence among the libertarian right and the progressive left is very important, because this is not a partisan issue. This is not an ideological issue. This is an American versus a Soviet issue. And Congress cast a Soviet vote. And that, I mean, I don't even mean that to be funny. That's kind of how it went down. And so the question is
Soviet vote.
yeah, I mean, in some respects, if you put it together with the surveillance regime we do live in a society with demonstrably less freedom, I think, than the Soviet Union. I want to lay out one point that people often forget with respect to who gets charged for terrorism. You might think that terrorists are, the boogeymen, right? Like the folks who you might find in Guantanamo Bay. If you go to the federal facilities where people convicted of terror offenses are held, 30% of them are young white men from the Pacific Northwest whose crimes were essentially environmentally motivated vandalism, or in the worst cases, arson. The Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act makes it a terror crime to stand on a sidewalk with a sign outside the home of someone who works for a company that makes pharmaceuticals by experimenting on animals, or conducts factory farming operations. It's not just a crime to raise your voice, it is terror to raise your voice. And under the NDAA, it's not even the case that the state could prosecute you. You would just be detained, period. And granted, you still have habeas rights, but anybody who's watching what happens in the DC circuit with the Guantanamo appeals knows how much teeth habeas has now, right? I mean, habeas has been watered down to a shadow of, when it was secured 800 years ago in the Magna Carta, it was a tool to be free from executive fiat and arbitrary detention, and we just legislated that away 5 months ago. And so the question, I think, before you as a community is how to react to that. And I don't think that passivity is an adequate answer for yourselves or for your children, quite frankly. And remember that you hold a trust for people beyond yourself. And as a community in the nation's capital, with a particularly discernible political perspective, you have an opportunity, I think, to inform the national debate. There are campaigns currently happening in over 36 American cities, all across the country: Dallas, Texas, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 5 different cities in California, Seattle and Tacoma, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Miami, Florida. All over the country, concerned Americans are raising their voices, and you have the opportunity to join them. And I think it's very exciting that the Montgomery County Civil Rights Coalition has raised that flag. And I think it's great that you're all here tonight to learn how to get more involved. Maybe just, I'll leave it at that, because I'm really interested in hearing what you all have to say and your questions, and I really look forward to hopefully having a vibrant exchange. I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. Thanks again for being here.